What's the name of this place?
So, we're the Rock and Jellyfish Lounge in Twa-Walcott, or the Twa-Walcott Rock and Jellyfish Lounge.
That rolls off the tongue.
It rolls off the tongue. Well, I wanted to name it Twa-Walcott, which is what the natives called Gig Harbor when they were here in the 1800s, when the first white settlements came, mainly people from Croatia. But that, as you said, comes trippingly off the tongue, especially after a few of these. So
yeah, when you gave me your write up for my blog post, I was looking at the words. I'm like, is this even English? Because it was like TLAWA, and I'm like, I guess that's what it is. Sure.
Yeah. Well, the Gig Harbor History Museum spells it with this anyway, it's indecipherable. So, Rocking Jellyfish Lounge. Why? Because there's a rocking chair, 2 rocking chairs on one end, and 2 jellyfish on the other.
So you're going for the very literal.
We're very
literal here.
Although it does sound, I admit it sounds I guess kind of cool.
No, the rocking jellyfish is awesome.
Yeah, it does. It does sound cooler than it really is.
The B-52s have rock lobster, and you have rocking jellyfish.
Yeah, that's good. Yes.
Yeah.
So after a couple more of these, we'll be singing for you.
Yeah, a couple more of
these.
B-52
song.
We'll be acting dumber, but yet we'll think we're smarter and more clever.
But everyone had matching towels.
When we talk about tiki, one of the main things we always talk about is escapism.
Yeah.
The idea is to, sometimes life can be tough, and people want to we want to unwind with a Mai Tai, go into a different location, and escape the real world for a while. And that was sort of what tiki was all about in the mid-century.
Yep.
The reality is that not everyone could afford to get on a boat or get on a plane and go to the South Pacific. So the closest thing you were going to get was going to a Trader Vic's or a Don the Beachcomber or any other exotic, because there were when they were talking about exotic or exotica in the mid-century, it's come down to 3 different things: Polynesia, South Pacific.
Okay.
Morocco, essentially Egypt, Middle East, or the Orient.
Yeah.
Those seem to be the 3 exotic kind of things, and there was different motifs that you could do with that. And you were talking to me, and you were saying that, before tiki bars and stuff like that, what was really, really big in the 20s and the 30s, and I guess maybe even before that, was theaters.
Yep.
And I love looking at old pictures of cities and stuff like that. And I'm from Pennsylvania, and I grew up in this city called Reading, Pennsylvania. It's a small city. It's very, very, it's not big. It's not as big as Philadelphia. It's like half the size of that. Not much going on, but I remember looking at pictures of the main street of this little city, and there's not one theater downtown, but 5 of them.
Yeah.
One, boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
And I was really wondering, why? And why was there so many theaters back then?
Yeah.
And you came up with the answer.
Yeah, and we were talking about theaters because Don the Beachcomber, Trader Vic's, and Walt Disney, let's take 3 examples.
Yep.
They didn't live in a vacuum. They were all creative masters in their own way of their genre, right? No one's going to top Disney for what he did, especially in the amusement parks and then later in the movies. No one's going to top the influence of Don the Beachcomber being our original godfather of the tiki movement, or the way Trader Vic's for a while commodified it, in both a good and a bad way when I say that, right? So they didn't exist in vacuums. There wasn't just an oasis of cultural wasteland and a tiki bar in Nirvana, right? And ta-da, shining light. If you look at Los Angeles in particular, and you look at a street appropriately named Broadway, that there are, even today, the facades of, I think, 11 buildings, and some of them are still actual theaters. And in fact, half of the commercials that I will see on TV that feature the interior of a movie theater are the Orpheum Theater on Broadway, even today, because it's a huge area for filming of, especially of commercials and some spots in movies and whatnot. And so so exactly the point. And so the point of even at what was in, let's say, 1900 and 1930, a moderately sized town and moderately prosperous, obviously. Yep. Since then it hasn't been, like where you're from, is that they have these theaters.
Yeah.
And so what we were talking about is, since at least, I want to say 1900 or maybe World War I, 1913 to 1917-ish, the world of entertainment is out there, and there's this whole idea of what, if you think about what people did for entertainment, and again, this ties into that Tiki's not in a vacuum. What a lot of people did was go to the movie palaces, or before that, they were vaudeville and burlesque house. So vaudeville was an entertainment. A lot of the best acts were part of circuits. So Orpheum, which later merged with Radio Keith Orpheum, which became RKO in the movie theaters, the Orpheum Theater is famous. There's a lot of Orpheum theaters or former Orpheum theaters across the United States.
So it was like a chain.
It was a chain, a vaudeville chain.
Wow. So kind of like, because I've seen an Orpheum theater before, and it's like,
sure.
I didn't realize that was like a chain.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is like these acts would essentially go on tour?
Some of the best ones would.
Okay.
Some of the famous ones. There was one called the Gum Sisters, which is a singing and dancing troupe, and one of the Gum Sisters, was Judy Garland, and so she, got her start as a kid with her. I think they were her biological sisters on Broadway or on vaudeville, and they went out on these circuits. W.C. Fields, before he went into movies, was a great vaudeville actor and actress. Related to vaudeville and even predating vaudeville, and a lot of this was sort of imported from England in Victorian times in terms of entertainment, as far as I can understand, was burlesque, which was the more hardcore, both in terms of blue comedy. This would be the equivalent of going to see your R-rated movie, in terms of the comedics, and even sometimes some of them did a circuit as well, as I understand it. And then of course there was the women who danced, and even the strippers, and so Gypsy Rose Lee being the most famous of them, and those were burlesque house. So the burlesque house were, a lot of the audience, as I understand it, was male, and it was more blue, and it was somewhat frowned upon and seen as a little disrepute and a little dangerous, whereas vaudeville was a more cleaned up version and a more artistic version. And in a vaudeville at a bigger city on these circuits, it could be smaller, it could be bigger. You'd have anywhere from, I believe, I'll throw out numbers and some scholar will correct me, but 9 to 13 acts. And so you'll have somebody come out and sing. And so you should have a strong act probably at the beginning if people come in on time. Although Los Angeles, people always arrive late, so you might put your strong act later before intermission, and then you'll have a juggler or a comedian. If you think of America's Got Talent today, although people would do that, and they'd try out acts, they'd have acts on the circuit.
So literally a variety show.
A huge variety show. Okay. That's exactly what it is.
But what you're getting at is that, like, essentially any type, if there was some level of entertainment.
Yep.
As far as a show is concerned.
Yep.
Because there were music acts, right?
Oh, yeah, music.
So you had music, comedians.
And the bigger cities would have their own bands.
Guessing.
Magicians, yep.
And all this stuff happened in theaters.
Well, and that there's an old theater saying, you don't go on after women and children. Well, that was in the vaudeville days, because the vaudeville bookers and the people who go after them, you never know what an animal's going to do on stage, or a kid is going to do on stage, or what they're going to leave behind. But audiences loved it. We still love it today. I mean, again, look at TV with the variety acts that we now have, these entertainment shows. And and what was interesting is they built buildings around them. And getting to what we're talking about, experiences, is, so, what the hell did people do? Well, they went out at night. This is pre-TV.
Yeah. Well, there's no television.
No television.
I mean, I guess there was radio, but...
There was radio, and people did sit around in radio and listen to mainly sports, or maybe
news, I'm guessing.
News. But even then, the radio became such an important medium in the 30s, and then in World War II and the Depression.
And then here's you think about it, it's like it's the 20s, it's the 30s, and your radio, it's not like surround sound with a bass box. It's like a little speaker that's this big. It's AM, and it's like.
Yeah.
How long until that shit gets old? So one thing that I've always noticed, and you're going to elaborate on this more so, is that was always amazed like how beautiful and how elaborate these theaters were.
Mm-hmm.
And themed.
Yes, themed.
So why?
So, well, because again, the escapism, the exoticism that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, let's think about it, is the architectures would take what is an Americanized view of these exotic locations that you mentioned, right?
That's the key, right?
Oh, it's hugely important, and it's hugely important.
It still is today.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that a lot of people kind of have to you have to understand, even when it comes to tiki. It's an Americanized version of a perception of what the South Pacific is.
Yeah.
And it's not authentic. It's just an interpretation. Think about movies, right? Mm-hmm. Think about like when you're gonna film a movie. A lot of times they're going for stereotypical shots.
Yeah.
So like you want to film in a diner. Right. Well, then you want the most diner-looking diner you can do that in, you know?
Right.
If you, like, say, I literally just went and saw the Elton John movie Rocket Man, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess the whole thing is that, like, his mom and dad weren't very nice to him. They're kind of mean. So in the movie, like, they play up him and his mom and dad being mean, you know? And it's just like, and everything's about stereotypes.
Or archetypes. Stereotypes. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah.
An archetype would be better.
It's a theme, or today we'd say it's a meme.
Yeah,
feeling, right?
Yeah, so like when you think about like say the Egyptian, a lot of Egyptian theaters out there.
There are,
but it's an interpretation of what Egypt was to.
And it was the reason there's a lot of Egypt theaters is because the vaudeville we talked about.
Yeah.
Became the architecture for the vaudeville houses. They emerged and movies took over. So you'd have shows maybe around movies, and then the movies took over. And then beginning in, I want to say 1927, but don't quote me on that. Then they built these palaces for movie. They were called the movie palaces. And in a city like Los Angeles, which is emerging as a slightly bigger city, they'd seat 1, 2, and up to, I think, 3,000 people. Which is a lot of people.
3,000 people in a theater.
In a theater, and
well, that would make sense.
Before the Depression, they'd be filled, especially on the weekends or certain evenings. They'd be filled, and people will go out to this communal event. And so, what's really interesting about the architecture is a mishmash to get a feeling of what Egypt is like. So, if you go to the Orpheum Theater in Los Angeles, what is today the Orpheum? It's the second or third Orpheum. The first one is called the Palace, which is Victorian, but it's very French. It looks very French, but it's got some French stained glass here, some beautiful statuary there. It's got a mishmash of things, and you get the vibe of Victorian age, French, Egyptian. I mean, everybody's heard of Grauman's / Mann's Chinese theater, right?
Well,
there
absolutely.
You go. And of course, the King Tut. The reason why if you can pinpoint when Egyptian theaters came, was the discovery of King Tut's tomb, because then the people who were providing people with their daily and weekly entertainment were the movie people, and so they went and they did this mismatch of what they thought Egypt was. So it is so heavily influenced by King Tut and not by other eras of Egypt. I mean, Egyptian history spans thousands of years, but it focuses on what the American imagination of what that tomb would look like. And especially a darkened theater is so cool. And that's what's cool about a tiki bar, which is, I guess, to go into tiki a little bit, is why, when we say there's an authentic tiki, or Don the Beachcomber claimed to have been influenced by travels to the South Pacific, and other people say that, well, that's kind of BS, because he was, a great BSer, So there is no one authentic tiki, too, because we do the same thing. I do the same thing here. I've got a mishmash of styles of mugs that I happen to love for a variety of reasons. And, you know, we all have this kind of idea, this kind of theme. And so, especially before the Great Depression in the U.S., that's what people did. That's why a medium town like you grew up in, or a small to medium town, had more than one theater, because people went beginning of the era of World War I, and especially after 1917. Interesting, there was an influenza epidemic then that sort of put the kibosh at the end of World War I on people socializing together. But people came together, and especially before the Great Depression, what did you do? My father, who's in his mid to late 80s, grew up in San Francisco, and you know, what if you were a kid in San Francisco, taking my father's example, and he was born in the 30s. So you take the 30s to the 1940s, maybe. How did you do two things for my dad in particular? One is, when you were a little kid, how did you keep up with your playmates on what happened in Buck Rogers last week? Yeah. There was no TV, you know, and comic books weren't that big yet.
And Buck Rogers was like, that's where they played in the theaters. It was a serial.
It was a serial.
So like every week you had to go.
You had to go, and so you could talk to your playmates about what the heck happened last Saturday at the movie theater. There was a local movie theater.
So theaters. Well,
yep.
Movie theaters worked differently back then, is what you're saying.
They worked different.
Because how things are now is like, you go and I want to see this movie, and you go in and you see that movie, okay, it's done, now get out. But what you're saying is like, back then, the movie theater was essentially like the television.
You know, the whole thing about a tiki bar, the whole thing about these movie theaters is we get to control the environment. Yeah. And that in some ways sounds bad or Orwellian and scary, and maybe it is, but on the other hand, I mean, I used to love going camping, and, you know, but would I really want to go camping in Florida in the middle of July and deal with bugs and alligators and now anaconda, blah, 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 blah.
Right? Well, think about, like, when it comes to anyone, if there's anyone who can control the environment,
yeah,
it's Disney.
Bingo.
And you go to Disneyland, or you go to Walt Disney World, or any of the Disney locations across the world, it's controlled.
Yeah.
And could you imagine a Disney experience that isn't controlled?
Right.
It would be a train wreck.
Right. But what if Walt Disney got a bunch of his Imagineers and then say, you get to do your own trippy acid trip of a room or something. And that's what Meow Wolf is. And it's an artistic collective.
That's Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, right?
Well, maybe it is. Yeah, I love that ride.
That ride messed me up, you know. Yeah. You're like, what? I remember as a kid walking out there and be like, what was that, Dad?
And as you get older, you used to get messed up to go on that ride. Yeah. And that's another story.
I'm going to bring this all home by saying this. I think there's always been a need for escapism.
Agreed.
And back then, back in the day, when the time with these theaters, it was more location based. But now it's starting to become more beyond a location and a time. You know, now it's sort of like anything. Let's create an alternative reality that doesn't have to do with a city or a place or anything like that. I'm excited. I've always said this before. Like, when it comes to bars that are themed or full environments, I am up for anything. Yeah. I am up for anything as long as it's fully immersive in its experience, and you're kind of like, and you walk out of there and you're like, wow, I can't get that experience anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the thing we're sort of riffing off of, and I don't know the answer, have we gone from the collective to the individualistic, and are we emerging back into smaller collectives? I don't know. But
it's going to be smaller collectives. But that's how it is now.
But isn't that cool? Because we have so much choice.
Yeah, I think so.
And so on balance, I think it's a good thing.
I think so too. Yeah, because when you got to think about just exactly what you said, there was no TVs, there was no internet, there was no anything. Everyone went to these theaters or went to the baseball games because your choices were limited.
Right.
And now we do have choices.
What was a movie? Was it Pleasantville?
Yeah.
Where you immerse yourself in a black and white world. So think about, too, the LGBT community, the nonconformists, the artists. Now, I mean, yes, there are some places that unfortunately aren't there yet, but we're all kind of past that, aren't we? We're all accepting of it, and and if you want to hang with that community or be part of a broader community, well, yeah, cool, whatever. Yeah. And that's a good thing. So I think on balance, I think we're in a good spot. I mean, I don't know, there's not a right or wrong answer. So it isn't just place and time, although I agree with you on that. I think it's also, we've gone from a collective to sort of an autonomy, and now we're in sort of this age, which I hope is a good age, where we can be, I'll use my term, selectively social, and be happy with it. Oh, you just want to look really smart. I was casually leafing through an American history book.
Hold on, I got to do this right.
There you go.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. I was just catching up on my reading, The Reader's Companion to American History.
Reading it front to back.
What made you decide to pick this book up?
Were
you at Walden Books and you're like,
oh no,
oh, this looks compelling.
Well, to me it is. I mean, I love reference books. I love American history in particular, but world history as well. And, and especially, although I got this one in the post-internet era, if you think about books I got, I probably got this a little before, in the 90s too. You see, Ray, back in the 90s, us older folks used to get a lot of our material and knowledge out of things called books.
Hey,
and reference books.
Pops, tell me what was like growing up in the 90s.
Yeah, the 90s. All the way back in the 90s.
Hey gang, this is Tiki with Ray, and I just want to say thank you very much for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more episodes, click on the subscribe button. And if you liked the video, give it a like. That would mean a lot to me. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please leave a comment in the comment section below.